members of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister and his extremist agenda, once safe BC hospitals are now infested with chaos, drugs and weapons. The BC Nurses Union confirms staff are exposed to fentanyl and meth smoke, even in maternity units. This is wacko. That's why I will introduce the Safe Hospitals Act that will toughen penalties for criminals who bring in weapons and ban the minister for allowing open hard drug use in hospitals. Will the Prime Minister support our common sense Conservative plan, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, in the first order, Mr. Speaker, if we're going to have safe hospitals, we have to provide science-based, evidence-based information and not support misinformation, because too often in our hospitals it is actually misinformation that is fueling much of the aggression that our doctors and nurses is facing. And secondly, I would say to the member opposite, the Health Committee going and listening to people on the ground in British Columbia and hearing directly from those affected by this toxic drug crisis. Why were the Conservatives not there? Why did they not send anybody to listen? Why are they not actually on the ground listening to those people who are suffering in this crisis? It's time to act on solutions and evidence, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from South Surrey, White Rock.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it'll be news to the BC Nurses Union that they're spreading disinformation. Here's the reality. Nurses should never be exposed to fentanyl smoke in their workplace. Patients should not have to worry about dangerous weapons when they're vulnerable, seeking treatment in hospitals. After 9 years, I can't believe I even have to ask this. Does the Prime Minister support tougher sentences for criminals who bring weapons into hospitals? And will he make it permanently illegal to smoke meth in hospital rooms next to newborn babies? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, of course, the only thing that separates the member opposite and her concern for victims and for families is that I and my colleagues here on this side of the House want to use evidence-based solutions to make sure that we respond to the crisis with things that are working. The reality is the strategy the member is advocating was first led by Newt Gingrich in the United States. It was the greatest disaster of his career. He has completely abdicated any responsibility for it, saying that it was a disastrous mistake. Stephen Harper's only actual advisors are saying the same thing. What they're advocating wouldn't work, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Cumberland Colchester.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal coalition, Canadians are suffering with crime, chaos, drugs and disorder. The Minister talks about evidence. What about the evidence from the BC Nurses Union and their outcry to ban weapons and hard drugs inside of hospitals? What more science could there be than that, Speaker? On this side of the House, Conservatives announced our plan for tough penalties for weapons in hospitals and to not allow the Minister to decriminalise or even legalise hard drugs. Why do we have to ask again, will the Prime Minister make it illegal to smoke crack and meth in a hospital next to a baby?
It should be something that's debated in the House.
The Honourable Minister for Mental Health and Addictions.
Mr. Speaker, I find it disappointing that the member across actually did not join the recent visit by the Health Committee to BC to speak to experts on the ground. Actual member of the committee, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we follow science, we follow medical experts, we follow best evidence-based practices in order to save lives. The war on drugs didn't work then, it will not work now. We need compassion, evidence, and science to guide us through this.
L'Honorable Député de Sudbury.
The Honourable Member for Sudbury. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives voted against our Medicare legislation, which describes our government's plan to provide Canadians with free medication. This bill represents an important step forward to ensure that Canadians all have access to free reproductive choices and that no one will have to ration insulin anymore. Can the Minister of Health tell us about the positive effects of this bill for Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Health. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for her important work on this issue. We share her objective of ensuring that everyone in the country will be able to access the medication they need. That is absolutely essential I have a simple question. For almost all of the members of the Conservative Party who are against this legislation, why are these members against access to contraceptives? I can only think that these members are against women's rights generally.
Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Island and Rideau Lakes.
Last week we learned that 3 contractors involved in this Prime Minister's $60 million Arrive scam alone were awarded $1 billion. After 9 years, we know that this Prime Minister isn't worth that cost. But let's also talk about the corruption. One of those contractors who received $20 million in IT contracts but did no IT work had their doors kicked in by the RCMP. But what we also learned is that they were wining and dining senior officials from this very government. So we know that it cost $60 million. How many boozy dinners were involved in this $60 million scandal?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend knows very well that there are internal investigations taking place with respect to this matter. A number of people were properly called before parliamentary committees and came to testify. And of course, he also knows that the RCMP are looking into this matter. He made reference to that in an overly dramatic moment as well. So, Mr. Speaker, he should have the decency to let the police do their work. We've said from the beginning, anybody who misused taxpayers' money will be held to account, and I have confidence that the RCMP will do their work.
Absolutely.
The honourable member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Speaker, the ad hoc committee concluded that the Prime Minister went to unprecedented lengths to hide the Winnipeg lab documents from Parliament to protect his government from political embarrassment. In other words, a cover-up. And the cover-up continues. Last week, Liberal and NDP MPs voted to shut down a parliamentary committee to get to the bottom of the cover-up. A cover-up of a cover-up by the cover-up coalition. A simple question, what are they hiding?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, the honourable member across would be aware that his party was against any of the mechanisms that actually brought these documents to light. It was this government, in fact, I was the House Leader at the time, that made sure that we had an ad hoc process to make sure that there was a way to properly vet secure documents. And that's why these documents in full, unredacted, are available for everybody to see. Now, the Conservatives refuse to participate in that, and they continue to search for some way to pretend those documents aren't available. But to any Canadian, not just any parliamentarian who wants to see those documents, they are available in their entirety.
L'honorable député de Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier.
The honourable member for Portneuf-Jacques-Cartier. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals are defending something unacceptable. The member for Glengarry Prescott Russell used vulgar and aggressive language towards Quebec witnesses who were defending the French language before committee on May 6th. The member must be punished. He has tarnished the reputation of the committee and all its members. But of course, for the Liberals, a buddy is a buddy. They'd do anything to defend one of their own. Will the Prime Minister listen to reason and finally respect francophones by removing the member from the Standing Committee on Official Languages and replacing him as head of the International Association Parlementaire de la Francophonie? The Honourable Government House Leader. Well, Mr. Speaker, the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell has spent a great deal of time in this Parliament defending French in Canada, much more than any member from the Conservative Party, in fact. We will continue to stand up for the French language throughout Canada, including in Quebec. And the member for Glengarry Prescott Russell will do everything that he can to stand with us to defend French throughout Canada.